Hey everyone, I'm Karsten.
And I'm Brianne.
And today we're going to take a look at the generals of Journey Into Nyx.
When the gods from Journey Into Nyx were first spoiled, we were a little disappointed. They all seemed either too subpar or too boring to make good commanders. But we found that with a little creative thinking, we were able to come up with some cool deck ideas.
For our first legendary creature, we're going to jump right into the gods with Athreos, God of Passage.
So, when I first saw Athreos, I didn't read the entire card and noticed that you choose an opponent to make the choice of paying 3 life. So that means you can kind of focus in a lot of your damage on one opponent and then go to them and say, hey, are you going to pay 3 life or can I get this sad sand back? Eventually, they're going to have to stop paying life at some point and just let you get your creature back.
And like many black and white commander decks, he really takes advantage of sack triggers and enters the battlefield triggers. Dictative Erebos, aka the new Grave Pact, is great with this guy.
So this deck, you would just want to make sure that all of your creatures are packed with value, either when they enter the battlefield, when they die, or both. Getting away from the basically black-white version of Savra, we can go to black-white tokens. Sure, there are a lot of good token makers, like, say, White Sun Zenith, that are instants or sorceries or what have you, but there are a lot of token generators in black-white that are creatures. So what you can do is play a lot of those creatures, and when they die, make your opponents decide if you're going to get them back, and because you're playing tokens, your deck is going to be very damage-oriented, so your opponents are probably going to have even less life than they would if you were playing the sack shenanigans deck. And so you're going to be able to keep getting back those creatures that are going to give you tokens and make more and more tokens and just kind of tighten the noose around your opponent's necks.
Next in our list of gods is Iroas, God of Victory. And it goes without saying, this guy is damage, red-white beats. The stuff we've seen before, like Aurelia and Gisela.
Unlike the other gods, Iroas doesn't necessarily lend himself to particularly creative deck building. You can't get really too creative with damage. You're not gonna go play some control deck with Iroas. Basically, Iroas says play dudes and turn them sideways. What dudes you turn sideways, or how many of them, or how you make them, that's all up to you. Just playing all the really good Boros beats is good. Or, Iroas is actually really good for tribal, because in red-white, there's a lot of good angels, there's a lot of good goblins, there's a lot of good soldiers. But Iroas, more than I think any of the other gods, is the one that is much better in your other 99 than it is as your commander. Having this in a Naya deck, or in the aforementioned Aurelia, Gisela, any of those, I feel like he's way better as a support card than on his own.
Next up, we have Keranos, God of Storms, and I am a red-blue fanboy, and I must say Keranos is going to be fantastic in Standard and in other formats, but my goodness, he just bores me to tears in Commander. At first, luckily, I think we thought of some kind of interesting stuff to do with Keranos. Red-blue, control, card advantage, etc., wasn't good enough, so we decided to do some wacky stuff. The first deck that we came up with is an Izzet lands deck. Yeah, a lands deck with no green. Basically a deck where you really take advantage of those lands that you reveal. Maybe one of those lands is a Valakut. Have Realm right out so all your lands are mountains. That's one side of it. There's of course all sorts of other awesome stuff that you can do with the lands.
And then the next archetype that we have for Keranos is something that I think you Nekasar players out there might enjoy, and that's Pressure Hug. And we're calling it Pressure Hug
because it's not quite group slug, but it's not quite group hug
and it's
either.
Not quite pressure.
Yes.
It's like the perfect unholy marriage of group hug and pressure.
Yes.
Because basically the idea of this deck is to, everyone gets to draw cards, but you can't punish them while they draw the cards, like in a Nekasar deck. So what you want to do is you fill up their hand, but then you play cards that deal damage to them for the cards that they have in hand. So what are people going to do if you're making them draw all these extra cards, and then you're shooting them for cards? Well, of course, they're going to try to play their cards. Well, if they play their cards, you're playing Izzet, so you're kind of really awesome at stealing things and copying things. So you're going to give them the choice of, do I hold on to my cards and take damage for them, or do I play them so I can help you win off of an insurrection?
If you find the right balance of giving your opponent stuff and then taking your opponent's stuff away from them, I think this would be a really fun deck.
Next, we have Krufix, God of Horizons. Krufix might be boring, but he's not bad. Krufix is kind of like if they took Omnath, stapled a reliquary tower onto him, and then fixed him to be multicolored.
Once again, kind of like Keranos, we wanted to come up with a couple of deck ideas that were outside of the box, and we came up with the X deck. Basically, a deck that really takes advantage of the colorless mana that you're going to be putting into your mana pool. What are the best spells that really require a ton of colorless mana? Well, X spells.
And we're not saying, oh, play Genesis Wave because that card's good. We're talking about making a dedicated effort to play any sort of card that has X on it. So you're not only picking the really good stuff, you're picking stuff that's good, but you're also picking it for the theme.
And what's kind of cool is there's other things you can do with this theme, like play Battlefield Thaumaturge, for instance, to kind of make those X spells even better and save up some of that colorless mana you're going to be producing.
And then the other archetype that we have is something I call Ye Old Kamigawa Hand-Sized Deck. It's a really long title, but if any of you were playing during the Kamigawa block, or you are a big fan of some of the cards, you'll know that there are a lot of blue cards and a few green ones that really care about the number of cards in your hand. And since Krufix has Reliquary Tower stapled to himself, you automatically don't have to worry about your hand size. And all of a sudden makes a deck that is fun, and sometimes it works, but sometimes it's janky. Krufix all of a sudden makes that deck extremely reliable and a force to be reckoned with. And our last god is Farrakha, God of Affliction. Now when I first saw Farrakha, I was like, oh my gosh, she sucks, she's terrible. But although she's probably the weakest of the gods, she ended up being the most interesting for deck building. Well, we saw snakes, and because of the Edric deck that we did, which...
Snake tribal, man.
Yeah.
I mean, she's half snake. She's a giant snake lady.
Although, to be fair, there were a lot of blue cards that were good for the snakes. And so, other than snake tribal, the snakes that Farrakha makes are enchantments. Why not play an Enchantress deck? Because green has the best Enchantress effects in the game. You're basically just making enchantments all the time. It's definitely an interesting take on Enchantress because most of the Enchantress commanders are green-white or they're Bant or something like that. There aren't really a lot of black commanders that get played as Enchantress commanders, and there are a lot of really good black enchantments.
Yeah, black isn't known for its enchantments, but black has some really great ones. And also for green-black, she makes a decent group hug deck. Hug in quotations.
So basically what you do in Farrakha group hug is you're like creatures for everyone. You get a snake, and you get a snake, and you get a snake. And then I'm gonna draw cards for all the snakes that you have, and when that snake dies, you're gonna discard a card, and I'm gonna make you take damage for all the snakes that you have, and then I feel like killing your snakes and keeping mine. So basically you give people creatures, but then you play cards that punish them for having creatures. So they didn't make the decision to have all these snakes, but that doesn't change the fact that you're gonna play Netherborn Phalanx and shoot them for however much. Not to mention, she's graveyard hate, so those snakes that they have used to be some useful creature that they might have been abusing.
So our final legendary creature is the only legendary creature in the set that's not a god, and that's King Makkar, the Gold Cursed. It goes without saying that a theme deck surrounded around King Makkar kind of sort of builds himself. King Makkar hoards all this stuff, and so you just fill this deck with artifacts. Nothing but artifacts. You got Karn, Silver Golem, Akroma's Memorial, etc., etc.
And then, of course, if you're going to tap King Makkar, you might as well do it the old-fashioned way and just attack with him. So there's two routes you could go with this. You could either go mono-black aggro, which is something we don't see as much in Commander, so it might be a little more interesting. There are a lot of fairly good aggressive black creatures. You can play those. But probably the better route, you could just play Voltron. You could just stick a Nightmare Lash and a Lash Wraith and what have you on King Makkar. Tap him when you attack with him. And then, when he untaps, you can turn their best blocker into gold, which you can then use to play more equipments.
So that was our take on the generals of Journey Into Nyx. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys have built any of these generals, or are building any of these generals, or have different ideas for any of these generals, you guys should let us know in the comment section below. Until then, I'm Karsten.
And I'm Brianne.
And thanks for watching.